Hi there, welcome to my channel. My name is CJ, and what I'm going to be doing today is doing a handwriting analysis or graphology on samples of Ted Kaczynski's writings. So, if you don't know who Ted Kaczynski is, he's the Unabomber. He mailed packages, bombs, to people over a course of a couple decades. And the idea behind graphology is our conscious mind chooses what we write, right? The subject we're writing about, what words we choose, how we express ourselves. Uh, the subconscious mind is how we write, right? How we form letters, spacing, all of that stuff. And it isn't some esoteric, semi-spiritual thing. It has a scientific process to it. Certain emotions, certain characteristics are expressed through writing, certain states of mind. So my objective here is to analyze his writing, and of course I will have a little bit of an advantage because, we all know about him. But I'll get into it. All right, here we go. All right, so what I've done here is I have samples throughout his life. And we're going to go through them. I've read this. I've actually recorded this video before, but I had some problems with it in terms of not switching. So as we go through here, the first thing we can see right away is I, right? I is a very important letter. It represents ourself, and it really can't be taken to represent anything else besides that, right? Especially in English. This, of course, changes based on your culture, your background, all of that. So what we can say is, yeah, he's very familiar with cursive, right? He writes cursive well. There's good flow in it. He even when it's crowded, he delineates letters really well. But we're going to go back to I here, right? So I, look, right, there's room in the loop there. There's all of that stuff. But as we get more to traumatic, this is less telling about, just so you can see some of what I'm going to cover going through slides here, is it gets narrower, right? The top of it gets much narrower as he's recalling a traumatic incident in his childhood, right? It's getting tighter. It's tighter. It's tough to talk about. So when we go through that, you'll also notice that his T's are among the best formed letters in his in the entire sample, right? Very distinct, very well formed, and that has to do with it being the first letter of his name. That's usually a letter that is someone's confident. They will write this the letter of their first name well. So we got some other stuff here. There's some other aspects you'll see later on, right? His defined use of hyphens, right? There's a lot of space. And so as we're going in, all right, so what we've seen here is, right, he uses hyphens right here on the end. So you're going to notice that later, right? There's a lot of crossouts. He's writing a personal thing, an autobiography. So we're going to see that tells a lot when someone's writing about themselves. Unfortunately, I couldn't find more, but as we go through different samples here, we're going to see more and more aspects, and we're going to see how they relate to each other. All right. So I found a workaround. It's going to require a lot of extra clicking. So if you don't like the clicking sound, apologies, but there's not much I can do. Okay. Right, we're noticing more use of this hyphen, right? He likes it a lot. And that's going to be interesting because, right, oil related. Not a lot of people use these. And that's going to be used to identify his writings and a couple other samples. look like? We got a lot of hyphens here. See, and this is called an artifact right here. This is when somebody who's familiar in writing cursive can connect it to another letter, and it'll come out in when they're printing, right? And printing's a way, if someone can write well in cursive, but they decide to print for a certain thing, that is a form of control over your writing. It's a form of presenting a clean face where you don't want to express yourself too much, right? Another artifact. But you're still looking to communicate your point, obviously, because you're writing. But we'll see a lot of these artifacts, and this is another thing. So his eyes, good foundation, right? His eyes look good. There is a little bit of a hook at the end here, right? There's a little bit of a hook, and we'll see that. That's generally someone who's kind of stuck in the past, but we see a good balance here with up. I'd say this is a person who's pretty well balanced or well controlled at the very least. There's not a lot of I don't see the craziness. This is a person who kind of knows what they're doing. Right, so we're going to go to a next one, which is I found in the National Enquirer website, and they said, oh, it's a series of 10 or 12 letters that Ted Kaczynski wrote to the love of his life. You know, he was a secret admirer to this woman, Tess. And they said they turned him into the authorities, but they never published anything more than this. And this would, that's always suspect, right? Is it actually written? Was it staged later? Anybody can write it. Well, hold on. Anybody can write a date here, right? So, I'm not sure why that went that way. But anybody can write a date, right? You can write this in 2001. This was published in 2017. But there's a couple of things where, analyzing this, I would think this is correct. So, right, we have these hyphens. These awkward hyphens. We have the underlines, which he uses to emphasize things. You'll see that throughout. His T, really well formed. Even when the rest of this is kind of a mess here, that T is still well formed. The T is well formed even when the rest of it, right? His M looks pretty similar to the sample we looked at before. We have this offset Y. And where else do we have that offset Y? Let me find a capital Y here. We'll come up to them. So I did this before, so it's a little bit of touch and go. So this isn't a good quality image, but you can see T's are generally well formed. I would say the 6 is the same that you'll see in other 6s throughout, right? The letters look similar. And so people can have similar characteristics, right? There's only so many ways to write a letter or a number. But when you start seeing 6, 7 distinct qualifications, right? A 3-part K here, which is pretty unique. Not a lot of people do a 3-part K. I've seen it before. I've done handwriting analysis for 7 years. I'm on Fiverr, all 5-star reviews. You know, I have some experience with it. I've seen a lot of samples. And before that, I used to do it as a party trick. So the K, 3-part K, pretty uncommon. Pretty uncommon. Maybe less than 5% of the samples I see have a 3-part K, especially a lowercase k. Uppercase, yeah, you'll see 3-part. But this is, you know, freak. That's not supposed to, he does capitalize it a bit, but it's a 3-part. We also have the offset Y. Just keep that in the back of your mind. We also, another thing we see are these big commas. Big commas on their own, a lot of people do big commas, but when you're seeing a big comma, it adds another point of certainty, right, where you can see Um, oh, okay, well, this one aspect, that might only add a couple of points on how certain I am. So I might take it from 65% to 70% certain that this would be a sample. If I could see the rest of the letters, I could bring that up to 90, 95%, maybe even 100. But I would say based on the sample I see, there's a lot of forward hooks on the T, right? You'll see forward hooks a lot on it. And I'll talk about hooks on letters in another video. That's its whole own video to kind of dive into that. Based on the quality, I would say I'm about 70% sure that that is his. So the National Enquirer, I would say, got that one right. All right, so we're going to go next. All right. So this is a letter that he wrote from prison. And the part I would like to point out is his comments. Oh, and this is something that relates back to his autobiography as well. A lot of this is, what's a YouTube-friendly way to say it? Self-pleasuring writing. Right? A lot of this is extraneous. He kind of goes into it. He likes to hear himself talk. I think that's kind of obvious when you have a guy who published a 35,000 word manifesto, or had it published in the New York Times. But you can definitely see that. And what we also see here is the start of even more even spacing between words here, right? Pretty even. Let's get that. And then, right, so this spacing is pretty even between words here. Pretty even. We're getting longer. We get long hooks on that. That's a desire to separate thoughts, right? So when you see this spacing between words, this is control. Most of us don't think about it, but it's a very measured pace. He spends a lot of time thinking about this stuff, getting his thoughts correct, right? And we see right here something in parentheses. I would imagine that this would have been that this part right here was a little bit of an improvisation that he decided to take out. We see with these rhetorical questions here, right? And we'll be able to tell that looking through other samples that he's not actually looking for a comment. He's more looking for a reinforcement that he's correct. Do you agree or disagree? Do you agree or disagree? AKA, I want you to talk about my writing here. I'm not caring so much as to what if your opinion is completely separate. Do you agree or disagree? Talk about this. It's a little weird that it did that right when I said it. Would you comment on the foregoing paragraph? Talk about what I'm talking about, right? It's definitely, if you read the substance, it's definitely a bit of a self-pleasuring writing style, right? We see a lot of these hyphens, right? This will be kind of, just note that this is a signature of his writing. And the curious part is I was looking up, I was planning on doing a series on serial killers. I was talking to a family member and they said, hey, why don't you do the Unabomber? I just saw the series. And I said, yeah, that's a great idea. What I noticed, I looked at a couple of them, and there's definitely some interesting connections between his writing and the Zodiac killer's writing. And it's, I don't know. I'm going to do the Zodiac killer. And then I found out some interesting stuff. Like he was in San Francisco during the confirmed Zodiac actual deaths himself, which seems interesting. Seems interesting. There's also some other connections as well that other people have made, but that we will dive into, and I'll bring back some of these samples. Right, so there's a couple things I saw in that where the question mark, that's the punctuation is very distinct. If you have a dot or a comma, it's a little hard to tie something in. But a question mark, everybody makes a different question mark. I can't off the top of my head think of two question marks I've seen that are exactly the same. So back to this. What we're seeing, right? This is a lot of he values what he thinks, and he wants you to talk about what he thinks. All right, this is a person that spends a lot of time thinking and a lot of consideration on, right? So we have a capital S here, but then he realizes it should be a lowercase s. Right? He spends a lot of time thinking about his punctuation, about his grammar. So when you see things in grammar, they're deliberate, right? These dashes are made very deliberately. He's not, there's nothing haphazard about this writing. And you can keep seeing that with the spacing, right? Relatively even spacing here. I mean, yeah, of course, there's some delineation. Did you ever ask yourself, aka I considered this, have you? Again, maybe some are approaching this condition. What do you think about this? This is a person that values their own mind a lot and doesn't really spend a lot of time thinking about, doesn't want to discuss things with others, wants others to discuss his thoughts about things. Right, so there's definitely a self-absorbed angle here. And that could be from living in a cabin, right? He just thinks he's had more time to think about anything, right? Look at the T. And here's an artifact, right? The T and the H connecting. That connecting T and H, it's a sign of intelligence when it's done in cursive. And I'll go into that more when I talk about hooks, because T's are big in hooks, right? You see, here, we'll zoom in. Right, we see a back hook here, and then we see a bottom forward hook going, and then a bottom forward hook going right there. So, the only thing to notice is how well formed that T is. Right, and uses a lot of punctuation. Right, I consider parentheses punctuation, more or less. Right, a lot of punctuation. All right, distinct. He really is consistent with his question marks. They're pretty consistent with each other. All right, so we're going to go in. I do this better on my first flow through, but I decided not to save each individual page, so we're doing what we can. So this is, actually probably should have been before. This is pretty soon after he got arrested, right? We see that 6 we talked about, right? And then the 6 we see here, right? So we're seeing that 6, and that's definitely written in a panic state right there, right? Lost his cool. So then when we're going back to a letter where he's in prison, he has plenty of time. You do see a bit of a breakdown, right? He's talking about, since the issue is one that you seem to find disturbing, right? He doesn't find it disturbing. He's a little disturbed or annoyed that she finds it disturbing. Right. I didn't do a very good job of answering it since you still don't agree with me. I didn't feel I did a very good job of answering. I'm with a mouse here, so I'm definitely not going to be as accurate as with the pen. Since I didn't feel like I did a good job of understanding it, or I didn't feel I did a very good job of answering it, since you still find it disturbing, since you don't agree with me, there's no way you couldn't agree with me if you, there's no way I gave you a good answer if you still disagree with me. It must be me not explaining it. right here, right, that offset Y. There it is. That offset Y. Remember we talked about that? I told you to keep that in mind. So we have the offset Y there. Just keep that in mind. That's a little odd, but also that is tying back to this. So do we know if this is actually written by Ted, right? It's a National Enquirer thing, so it could be true, or it could be, Bat Boy in a cave in Afghanistan. I would say this is more, John Kerry's mistress. Not John Kerry, pardon me. John Edwards' mistress level of maybe, okay, maybe they had it right. Right, that offset Y, capital Y. There's a ton of clicking to go in between samples here. So it's just going to happen. Right, offset Y. Seeing it again. Yeah, I would say that sample is true. That would raise it up to, I'd be about 80-85% sure that's his. Still a possibility it's not. It's maybe someone with, a high degree of awareness about writing and copying certain letters. Could be. But I would say I'm about 80-85% sure. Right, big commas. Just another sign. And outside of a courtroom or an investigation, not all of this is super helpful. There's other aspects that are interesting to see, because you can see what's reflected about yourself, right? How you form your I's is a big deal about, I and I am being the most important letter and the most important phrase in the English language. And there's a whole nother video about I and I am I will make another time. But we're just analyzing his writing right here. And then, those future videos might elucidate some things here for you as well. We see a breakdown in the writing is when he's getting to the emotional part, right? Sufficiently, right? He's using kind of bigger words to apply a sense of logic to his actions, right? To reinforce logic, right? We see the three-part K. We talked about how that was uncommon. We see it right there. Especially a three-part lower K. It's odd. So what we notice here, what's good to notice here before we move on to another sample, is if this was a personal reading, yeah, there's a lot of things I could unpack. But in terms of our reading, our overall impression, we have a lot of samples. I don't want to keep you here forever. Fully analyzing one sample takes about 30 minutes. And I don't want this to be a 4-hour video. I don't think you do either. So some things to keep in mind, right? Well-formed T's, got the lower hook. We'll picture that later. Artifacts, right? Look, we got artifacts here. And you'll notice more artifacts when somebody writes about a more emotional thing, right? The T, it's an artifact. That letter is important to who he is. He's Ted. So you'll see it more expressed. And cursive is a more expressive form of writing. So, handwriting, right? Versus print. So maybe I wonder if when you're in prison, if they make you write, they make you print. I wonder. I think he's thought this out pretty well. I think there's emotional. See, we have more artifacts here, right? When you see artifacts, that's maybe they require him to print these letters, or he's choosing print to hide something, and a little bit of his true emotions are coming out, right? Artifacts. These are handwriting artifacts. The T and the W right there. What do we see? E and R. E, expression, right? E, it's an expressive letter. It often will show artifacts if that's what we're looking for. And we are. So what else do we got here? Right, we have some underlining, which shows that not everybody underlines. But somebody who is trying to communicate themselves controlled wants to direct your attention, right? Wants to pull you in to their state of mind. You'll see underlines. Underlines means, hey, I think this is important. You pay attention. Do I feel my actions were justified? Give you a qualified yes, right? Again, we have that attempting to use a logical side of your brain to justify something, right? Adding, oh, hey, I thought about this, and yes, I am. It's a qualified yes. It's not just a yes. Um, right, we start seeing a little bit of disassociation of the I right there, losing a bit of his footing. Right. So this is an emotional thing he's writing. He does have an emotional attachment to this, but you can see that's why he's using those excess words to try to take away from it. We see a disassociation right here. What I've done, not going into it at all. Not the people I've hurt, not this. I would think that there's definitely a lack of empathy. But kind of a forced lack of empathy. He doesn't want to say what he did, because if he had no empathy, he would say, oh, whatever, right? Like, I don't give a shit. I bomb people. But when you see mixed emotions about what I've done, you see scraggly writing here. That's trying to disassociate himself from that thought. So it's not that he doesn't feel bad about it, is that he's kind of forces himself to not feel bad about it. Of course, his death, right? Oh, he just died, like a heart attack or a stroke. Not quite. Two, right? Another tack on. Again, a lot of trying to justify things here. Right? There's definitely emotional immaturity. There's high intelligence, right? And I don't think that I think that there is a baseline, but I think by acknowledging where we are limited in intelligence, because not everybody's as good as everyone else in another aspect, right? I'm not great at math, but by acknowledging I'm not great at math, I can create techniques to get around that. If I refuse to accept that, oh, no, I'm super good at math. Like, I'm great at math. Yeah, okay. Like, a little fake it till you make it, but I'm not going to be magically, innately good at math. So by kind of acknowledging our limitations, we can get better. If we admit that we're dumb at something, we can get better. If we never admit that we're dumb or bad at something, well, there's no room. We're not giving ourselves, oh, okay, there's room to improve. This is a person who's intelligent and takes time to reason out his thoughts. There's definitely an emotional stupidity here, though. He's, as we saw where he's putting the questions at the end of the sentence, like, hey, don't you agree with me? Or what do you think about my brilliant thoughts? That comes across as emotional stupidity, right? He can say his thoughts, and he's reasoned his thoughts so well, and sometimes he usually has, but he can't take any criticism. It's a very kind of static smartness. So there's not a lot of fluid intelligence I see here. His intelligence comes from deliberately thinking things out over time. And here's where we get more to kind of a person who thinks they're smarter than they are, and that can even be with really smart people. If you have 160 IQ, you could still think that you are, 200 IQ. But no, you're 160, still great, but you're not as smart as you think you are, buddy. That's where we see here again. Right, just a lot of self-pleasuring writing. Not as justification. This is really a reach. This is kind of not getting. People aren't going to think that he's justified for his actions because George Bush bombed people in Panama. That's, it's just not the same tier. And you start seeing a breakdown of the writing, right? There's bother, right? And you'll start seeing more artifacts. Look, the T and the H connect, right? Start seeing even more artifacts in this, and not as well written. Because there's something that doesn't really align here. He gets that. You start seeing spacing still pretty good, right? But you're seeing a lot more artifacts here, right? The M and the O, right? We didn't see that before. TH are now always connected, nearly always. TO, he starts connecting more and more. He's starting to view this as, because this, I'm justified. And he's attempted to convince himself, but he's convincing himself in a vacuum. This is a person who has good ideas but doesn't put those ideas to criticism, right? And we see he doesn't even bother asking the rhetorical question because he doesn't want to be proven wrong. So when he asks why, he gives the answer. And this is the end of the letter, right? He's not looking for discussion about it like the other thing, where he's like, hey, discuss my logic, discuss my thinking. No, it's oh, why? Let me give you the answer. This is the answer. Don't look further into it. I'm done writing. So we got another writing here. Which one is this? Unabomber sample. Okay. This is more recent. His writing's gone better. You're still seeing artifacts. So this is important because if he's required to print, this is something I don't know. If someone can tell me, I would really appreciate it. Because if he's required to print, right, because it's prison and they want to be able to read the letters before they send them out, is this would mean, these artifacts would mean, and the fact that we know he can write in cursive and well and comfortably. He started an autobiography in cursive. 0 to age 9. And then, I'm assuming further on, but we don't have that sample. So he's comfortable writing in cursive. And autobiography is an extremely long thing to write, especially for someone who likes the sound of their own word on paper so much. So if he is comfortable writing in cursive, why is he printing? If he's required to print, we could see this is just him expressing himself, and where you see more artifacts, like here, right here, that would mean that this is something that he's emotionally connected to. If he is, where you see more artifacts is where you should look more if you want to know his personal feelings more. What's more true to what he's thinking and what is just kind of, BS. And he knows it. If he's not required to write in printing, that's where it's interesting. Because if he's not required to print and he's printing, this is a hiding mechanism. right? So cursive is very expressive. Your pen is on the paper a lot. So when you see someone who can write cursive and well, but you see them printing, that's a hiding mechanism, right? And so if you know why he is printing, is that because you have to in prison? Is it because you have to print, or is this a choice on that he's making? Right. We see this other thing. This I can't imagine that you would change that much in a supermax prison. And do you agree or not? Do you agree with what I'm saying or not? I don't want your opinion. I want your opinion about my opinion. Do you agree with the foregoing paragraph or not? Right? We see it again. This is a person who values their intelligence a lot. Also, someone who thinks they're a lot smarter than they are. He is smart and he takes time to develop his thoughts. He's not as smart as he thinks he is. Maybe, okay, people say he's great at math, but okay, is your English teacher going to write some complex theorem in in some advanced calculus class? No, it's different aspects. So this is a person who is we see more underlines, more here's where I want you to look. And do you agree with my thought? This is a person who's decently smart, but accentuates that a lot. A lot of that comes from their willingness to think and dedicate time to thoughts. And part of that is asking these leading questions. Asking these leading questions means that more often than not, his intelligence isn't a purely natural state, right? He's not willing, and it comes with the ego. Also, I want you to talk about what I want to talk about. We see some curious things, right? So in eyes, I haven't really been pointing them out much, but back here to the T, well-formed, always well-formed, right? Look at that, well-formed. So a good thing to look at is I. I represents us, right? Or what he's writing about there, Islamic. He views Islam as in a positive light. Right, the I is well formed. The rest of it, he has some artifact in there. I would say he has a positive view of the Islamic world, and that would correspond with his view of technology, right? Right. The I is good because it's interesting. So I has three parts, right? Has the cross and has this. So I is interesting because it represents here. On top is the support, how much you can carry, right? It's a good platform, right? How much I guess personally, how much you're able to carry to bring forwards with you, right? Your strength. And the bottom represents kind of a foundation, right? If the foundation is like this, it's going to fall this way or this way. If your foundation is secure, it's not going anywhere. It's stable, right? If you have this, or you have it something lower like this, or crossed, all right, this is not going to be able to, that's going to fall off one of those two ways. So I hope I'm expressing it well here, but this is my first video, so cut me some slack. I'll get better over time. But that's essentially a visual representation of what I means to us in the English language. So when you see well-formed eyes, right, and then you see it here, a bit of, and this is a bit of confidence. If you see something lower, they're not confident that they're worthy of this weight, right? Worthy of carrying. And this just represents life or whatever. They're not comfortable that they're worthy of carrying that weight, or their foundation might feel rocky. His foundation, he feels good. He feels good. You do see some. He does feel flattered by this, right? He takes this very well. You see that with the lower eye, the less well-formed tops here on the eye, right? You do see a little bit of artifact, but not much. He kind of, yeah, a little bit of artifact. He feels flattered, and he really feels that someone in Dubai really likes his writing. If you look back in the video, I'm not going to do it because we need to keep moving, but the U, better formed than America's U. All right. We got another one. Right here. So this is 2010. We're going to zoom in a bit here. Make sure that you can still see it. Good. Carol, I've received your letter. There is a lot of hiding here, right? The spaces in between these are very, very even. Let's take this one, it's better, right? Very even. There's a lot of measured. He does that. We know he does that, right? He's good at spacing. He's good at thinking out, being very deliberate with his thoughts, right? If you see a lot of crowding, a lot of openness, that's usually someone who's kind of writing off the top of their head. When you see very measured spacing on the letters, this is a person who's writing very deliberately, who thinks very deliberately. And the more you see it, the more deliberate they're thinking, right? A person who really thinks things out. And it's not necessarily a good thing or a bad thing, it just is. This is someone who's really, really deliberate, right, in their thoughts and how they try to communicate with people. And that would make sense considering he was in a cabin, limited interaction with people. He would probably think things, right? There's still this, I'm telling you, pay attention to where I tell you to pay attention, right? Definitely when you see that with the other things, there's a bit of, I guess, disdain for the thinking of others. He doesn't think highly of others' thinking in general. Not necessarily to this person, but in general. Right, same eyes. I'll go into I's and IMs. I know I didn't really cover it well and fully. I will go into I later on. It's the most important letter. I'll definitely make a video about it. Right, we have the triple K here. Triple K. Again, an uncommon thing. That lends even more validity. Where you see, oh, he just didn't do that triple K once. That's how he writes his K. He loses a bit of his cool here, right? We know he's very deliberate with punctuation. He underlines things. He adds hyphens that are grammatically correct but unnecessary. The period outside of a quote here is end of your letter, right? You see a little poorly written F. habits, and about the hardest part of being in prison. My time is limited and I never have enough of it to do all the things I need to get done. So I need to tell you frankly that I'm not in the business of entertaining people with the details of my personal life. And the spacing becomes even wider here, right? Basically, he's hiding a lot in here and he wants to emphasize it. He's not in the business. He wants you to read every letter. He wants you to read how he thinks, right? Very segmented. And so somebody who thinks very segmented is good at punctuation, and he really is good at punctuation and underlining. He does it well. And he does it to emphasize a point. But when you see an error with someone like that, that's definitely loses his cool there. Not interested in people's personal life. Yeah, not surprised by that. I don't know who this Chris Black is. That's a little interesting. Do you? Um, a bit of condescension here. He's probably trying to get back for this little part here. Probably trying to, it's a little pushback, right? Do you? Have you answered Chris Black's letter? If not, then I suggest you answer it promptly. Basically, a little bit of putting her back in her place for asking about his personal life, which he's probably communicated before that he's, at least subtly, that he doesn't want to talk about it. He's also buried it, right? He's buried the lead. He doesn't talk about it here. Sent to me here. I wonder who Mr. Carroll is. Right? When we see best regards, Ted. And so here's the clearest one. Why T is important and why underlines are important is look, he puts two of them under his name, right? Oh. And the first letter, T, it's completely separate from the rest of this, right? This other stuff isn't anywhere near it. So, completely separate. And we have T. We have a bit of stuck in the past, right? It's not coming forward into the future. We have a bit of that, always that hook. He's dead set on bringing his past into the future, or into his future, or bringing it along with him. And we see this hook forward. I'll go into that later. But anyway, you see his T is very significant. So when you see T, and when you see it written poorly, that tells you to look a little bit closer at that section of writing. But also, that's how you can authenticate if something is consistent. Is the best letter that you write consistently is most likely to be the first letter of your first name. Or sometimes the first letter of your last name if you really have strong family associations over an individual identity. He doesn't have the strong family associations. He would put a K period there. He does T, Ted. Right, know him for the T. And our last one, which is a little interesting because I found this on two different searches that said this was his, but I'm not quite sure because they were sites that also had a lot of other junk going on. So I'm going to look at it and see if I can tell whether or not this is his writing or not. U, first thing that sticks out, capital U looks similar, right? You can do multiple ways. You can do it like that. You can do it like this. You can get a real round one going. Not like that. You can get a real round one going. There's a lot of ways to write a U. The U's written like that. The shaping is very similar. F's are similar. T's, right, we have big commas. We have unnecessary hyphens. T's are generally well written. There's a couple of not well written ones. Right, you see a similar, you see that bottom hook there. Again, poor quality. So when so much of it relies on being able to tell minutely, it makes this a little difficult. We see a lot of those TH connections that we saw before, right? And a similar one where it's a bit of a half connection there. So we see it here, right? We see use of colons. W's are similar. Yeah, I would say whole wheat. Most people don't, if they write whole wheat, they write whole and then wheat, including myself. So where he uses hyphens properly, but unnecessarily, right? We see a connection from the O and the A, which we see a lot of in his other writings. Yeah, I would say this is his sample. This is his writing. Capital K does look a little different. The better way to do it is, if you're analyzing two samples, is side by side. We do see some junky T's here, which question it. Consistent T, that's how he makes the other ones. Right, that hook on the L. I made that, I saw that popped out in my other video, the one that didn't record correctly. So that will be a little, but you'll see that. You'll see the L, the hook on the bottom L there, right? The T and the H are always touching, even when he's printed, right? Even when he's not connecting them, right? I did that the wrong way. But even when he's not connecting them, they're always touching, right? They're always, I'm not doing it in the order. I'm doing it in the best order that my mouse and markup will allow. Slab. An interesting thing is, if I could see a capital G, he's written other places. If I could see more pages of this journal, I would pay money for that. Triple K right there. Yeah, this is from his little journal for sure. You see a lot of these other ones doesn't raise the certainty rate too much, but when you see a triple K, that's an order of magnitude more poignant than other marks that we see, right? The L, okay. A couple junky T's. The hyphen, yeah, that's a little strange. Hyphen with hyphens, when used grammatically correct and uncommonly, not a lot of people, okay, whole wheat, some people might hyphenate that. But for shelter, hyphen, which, comma, however, has a few holes in it, it's pretty complex sentence structure, especially for a private journal. So punctuation becomes even more characteristic, more expressive, because this person then uses punctuation not as an accent, but as a tool of expression. So the more complex, the more skilled they are at using punctuation, the more it matters in the writing. right? We see these big commas. Yeah, good spacing as well. Yeah, this is definitely Ted's writing. So this is it. This is his journal. Okay, so that's most of it. I guess my conclusion would be an intelligent person who is smarter, it thinks they're smarter than they are, first of all, but also very deliberately uses time and their intelligence to think things out, right? Very measured approach. Doesn't have a high estimation of other people's intelligence. Doesn't really think highly of other people in general, I would say. Even people maybe he's friendly with, he, I guess, assumes kind of like, oh, they're kind of, they're simple. They don't spend as much time thinking as I do, and they're not as smart as I do. So that's where you see some of the condensation in some of the letters. The self-pleasuring writing style. Self-pleasuring writing style is a hallmark characteristic of someone who thinks they're smarter than they are. No matter how intelligent they actually are, they think they are smarter than they actually are. That's when you start seeing a lot of self-pleasuring writing. And most of the writing is self-pleasuring. I would say emotionally stunted. There's someone who their intelligence is done well for them, and their application of their own intelligence, their use of their own intelligence has done well for them, and they've never needed to develop emotionally at all. And that's where you'll see a lot of those questions that are, hey, how do you think about what I've spent all this time thinking about? Right? Give me your opinion about what I thought. Be within my thinking framework. And a thing where you have raw intelligence, you have emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is, raw intelligence would be someone who can write a paper really well. If you need emotional intelligence if you want to do well in a debate, right? You need to read what is the other person's intentions with this, what's the subtext, where are they going with this. Not a lot of that. Just a lot of spending his time developing his own intelligence. Doesn't really want to engage with people on their turf. Feels uncomfortable about that. That's another. You see signs of disassociation, which he doesn't know how to emotionally process what he's done. I wouldn't say he's necessarily like a sociopath. There are some I guess by sociopath, he's not disconnected from what he's done. He knows what he's done, but he's made it make sense logically in his head. Yeah. So that'd be my conclusion. There are a couple others I could probably cover, but I like saying just things I'm kind of certain about. If you're interested, I will post a comment kind of with my thoughts typed out a little bit about some other stuff I found in here. But I think for a first video, that's pretty good. Thanks so much for stopping by. I have a Fiverr where you can order it for yourself. It's pretty cheap. I like to keep it cheap because people usually tip, and I don't want somebody to not get the benefit of learning about your subconscious mind because the price scares them off. So it's only 10 bucks. I make about a 30-minute video analyzing your sample. I do prefer cursive. It doesn't need to be something that you've written yourself. Thanks so much for stopping by CJ's Graphology, and I hope you have a great day. One more aspect I wanted to add is this is not a person who views themselves as crazy, like at all. He thinks he's very sane. There might be I don't know, maybe. It's hard to say when you don't um, have enough samples to really look at it, because the more drastic the statement, the more certainty you want to have, the more samples you want to see. But with that letter to Tess and a few others, they're definitely that letter to Tess shows that emotional immaturity, right? It becomes a personal letter written to a woman he has a crush on, and it's all over the place in terms of its clarity. And so when you see that, that is definitely a sign of that emotional immaturity, and uh, not knowing how to handle your emotions almost at a childlike level with kind of a logical thinking about it. There's definitely a capability to be, for those emotions, it leads you to have to ask the question, does he separate himself from those emotions because he's scared of those emotions? He knows he can do really terrible things if those emotions are let out of the box, that he intellectually can't justify, right? So we see a lot of intellectual justification for what he's done and a lot of emotional distance from it. Oh, because of how that advertising executive died. Oh, he died. That must have been really tough on the family. Oh, you mean like you killed him and that must have been tough on his family? Not to laugh, but you know what I mean? It's um, that aspect shows a fear of his emotionality, right? And you can see that in how restricted he is in so many aspects. When you look at the test letter, the one from the National Enquirer that I think is his, you see when brought into an emotional state, a state where he can't think a lot. Oh my God, no, 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 I didn't do this. Hey Tess, I didn't do this. Um, he loses his cool, and the writing starts to fall apart. And that's where, if someone with a good degree of emotional intelligence, when they're writing an emotional expressive thing, yeah, the writing will have more cues, right? More clues, but it won't fall apart. It won't be so drastically different in terms of organization. It essentially, you're going to be communicating the same thing um, through your writing, communicating the same thing through your writing. So analyzing that led me to look at Ted with, um, I analyzed that and I went through his samples, and then I also had downloaded a bunch of the Zodiac's samples, and um, there's some interesting connections between the writing, and there's also some other interesting connections, like times they were there. So Ted Kaczynski was in San Francisco during the times of the murders. There's some similar writing clues, formations. There's uh, there's also some interesting things if you think about it logically, separate from the graphology. Um, that would make sense, right? So the clues we take and then kind of remove ourselves from it, and then I'll cover a few of them right here, but the video will be much more in depth. Would be why I'm kind of a stream of consciousness person, so there might be hiccups and pauses. I like expressing things the first time through. If I think about it too much, it'll be a million fucking takes. Um, you see someone who's disassociated with emotionality, and you think, oh well, why? He denies it, right? He's heard that before. Because, like I said, there's other people who have done all this research I would just be talking about. But you have someone who wants to be viewed for their mind, who shows a disassociation with their emotional state, right? Is trying to barricade themselves. Why would they be wanting to be known for that? Um, And the pattern kind of continues, right? Just killing in a different form. Killing justifiably versus what could be said as what should be said as unjustifiably. That I guess a better way to say it is killing that can't be logically expressed, that no one would have any sympathy for, or no one would have any understanding of. So I'm going to go into that. That should be my next video. I'm going to be going out of town for a bit. I'm going to try to get it done then. Don't know how that's going to work, if that's going to work too well, but we'll see. All right. Thanks so much. I hope you have a great rest of the month.